Real estate, you may get a few percent per year. The stock market's already at an all-time high. So where is the next big opportunity where you can make instant wealth? It's in a manipulated market that the price heads towards equilibrium. And obviously, kind of like with palladium, it went up 400% in short order. And silver has that potential to go much more than palladium because it is the most manipulated market in the world.
This is Donegan Kaiser, founder of Liberty and Finance. I'm now a licensed gold and silver dealer with Miles Franklin. Call me directly for the physical gold and silver that you need at the best price with personalized, private service from one of the oldest and best respected companies in the business. 30 years strong, A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau, 0 complaints, licensed and bonded, insured delivery or vault storage or IRAs, excellent prices, privacy and confidentiality, pay by check, money order, ACH or wire, satisfaction guaranteed. Call me directly at 419-819-9209 or my associate at 310-562-6400 or email us at kaiser@milesfranklin.com. Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We have a returning guest. John Adams is the chief economist at Good as Gold Australia. He also has a website, adamseconomics.com. He joins us again this Tuesday, February 16th, 2021. John, thanks for coming back on.
Thank you for having me, Donegan.
You have been prolific at writing on many important topics recently. You are writing about the integrity of elections in the U.S. and reaching out to our legislators there. You've been writing about the integrity of the COMEX and other metals markets and the concern you have about the lack of enforcement of rule of law there and what does that mean. You've been writing and exhorting people to get involved about the natural rights of citizens in Australia and elsewhere to basically redress the government for wrongs, but also, to petition the government for redress of wrongs, but also the ability to abolish or alter the government if necessary, following in the writings of Thomas Jefferson. And we want to maybe hit some of these things, but first, I think one of the things that's on a lot of people's mind in this month has been this shortage, this physical shortage or short squeeze on the silver market, I guess has been a focal point. There was the Reddit crowd that got people invested in coming in and disrupting what was perhaps an extremely over-shorted condition in the market. And then other retail investors piled on, and some people spoke with me and saying, hey, this is a cause. I want to do my part for the cause. I want to buy a few ounces just because I feel like we all need to do this to try to bring some truth and some reality to this market that otherwise has run away and had its way with people for a long period of time. So can we maybe take a look at that? Can you tell us what you're seeing on the ground in terms of physical availability and delays and supply and demand imbalance or whatever in the physical metals and the retail space? And then we'll talk about this silver squeeze and what's been going on with that and some of the official backlash. So first of all, availability of metals.
Fantastic. Okay, so in terms of the Australian retail market for silver, we haven't seen the sort of phenomena that's been happening in North America. So obviously, when we started to see at the beginning of the month with the price exploding and with Wall Street bets telling people to buy silver, we saw. I think there was a critical weekend at the end of January where silver squeeze was trending on Twitter. It was in the top 5 tweets in Canada, top 5 tweets in Germany. It was getting a lot of people talking. We did see an increase in demand in terms of as good as Gold Australia, and we do know from some of our colleagues in the industry in Australia that there was a surge of demand in terms of retail buying. What I saw was a lot of small orders, to be honest, a lot of new people coming into the market. So obviously we have a lot of existing clients. Some of them added to their accounts. We had a lot of new people, but the new people were of a relatively small nature. Now, in terms of supply, Our main product is our own sort of branded bars, and we do have our own refiner that is in Melbourne that sources physical silver from miners overseas, and we haven't had any problems around supply yet. There has been an issue around premiums because for our wholesaler to buy raw silver from the mines, they are being charged more because obviously there's a huge amount of demand by refiners and wholesalers across North America. So I would say that so far so good. There is a bit of a delay in terms of delivery, so sometimes some of our orders would take about 2 weeks to deliver, depending on the size of the order. I think some of those times have now blown out by a couple of extra weeks. But so far so good in terms of if we have big orders coming in that want to buy. Now, typically a big order for us would be $1 million plus. We do a lot of 6-figure orders and below. But if we had someone who came in with a 7-figure order today, we would be happy and able to meet that in terms of our refinery, and obviously some of the other players in the Australian market would be able to meet that as well. Now, I do have some contacts that are in Southeast Asia, for example, in terms of Singapore. So when this phenomena, particularly in the first week of February, started to occur, I did reach out to some of my Asian contacts and sort of said, well, what are you picking up? They saw a huge surge in demand, and some of these refiners do rely on American product, and they were finding it increasingly hard to source. But the surge in demand probably wasn't as intense as North America. So what I would say is that the Wall Street Bets Reddit phenomena is largely a North America phenomena. But nevertheless, as we get into this conversation about the silver squeeze, what's happened in the United States and Canada is a really big deal for the global silver market.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to that next. Is what has astonished me the most is not so much that some retail scale investors collaborated with each other on a grassroots peer-to-peer level and actually made a noticeable splash that really did cause some attention to be drawn to the metals markets, but that we're having a backlash against that from officialdom, from the head of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, speaking out against it, President Joe Biden speaking out against it, talking about trying to prosecute people who've been disrupting markets and that sort of thing. How do you look at that backlash from officialdom versus the silence we've seen in general from what's been described as systemic or systematic or regular manipulation of the metals markets over the past years or decades? Is that hypocritical, or is this something entirely different and in fact a more concern to orderly markets in general, or is this just, it's okay when the big guys do it, it's not okay when the little guys do it?
Oh, of course, yes. I mean, look, I was hearing someone in the last fortnight that said when the price falls dramatically, the CFTC says nothing. But when the price goes dramatically up, like it went from about $25 an ounce up to $30 an ounce, the CFTC put out a press release saying that they're now on the lookout for people who are trying to manipulate the market. So obviously, we are seeing complete hypocrisy from the Washington and Wall Street swamp. What I think is the most important outcome of the silver squeeze, or the attempt to squeeze the silver market, is like you said, the exposure. So and I would say it's not just the exposure of retail investors. There's a whole bunch of wholesale investors, hedge funds, etc., who may not be fully immersed into what's really been going on in the silver market. Now, I mean, you've been broadcasting for several years, and I mean, I remember in 2015-16 listening to you when you were interviewed with Ted Butler and Bill Murphy and some of these other guys, and they were hardly getting any sort of mention or any recognition. So I think what we've been able to do is to wake up a lot of big money. And now we're starting to see the big money. We're starting to see the big money coming in, and we're starting to see some people like Andy Sheckman from Miles Franklin saying we're seeing things that have never happened before, and that to me is very promising. Now, I've only been in the silver market for about 4 or 5 years. I know that Ted Butler's been in this game for 35 years. Andy's been in the game for 30 years as a dealership. But when you get some of these people saying, I've never seen this before. I think that's very promising in terms of it's now coming to the end of the process. And I think there was an interview I listened to in the last fortnight that talked about palladium. And in the palladium market in, say, 2017-18, the price went up 400% because the short contracts on the COMEX just couldn't source enough physical palladium to meet the demand. And so the reason why the reason how you squeeze these commodity markets is these people who have the shorts, or these institutions, it's a contract requiring them to deliver. And when they can't deliver because there's not enough to source, they have to allow the price to go higher so they can entice people to sell. And then as the price goes higher, that then feeds into itself, because as the price goes higher, people think, well, I can make money on this, I want to buy more. And then the demand goes up, and then the ability to source becomes harder. And I've heard Andy say to you and on other channels that in a gold and silver bull market run, people don't want to sell. And that obviously perpetuates the cycle, and that's kind of what happened with GameStop. A whole bunch of people on Wall Street bets started telling people to buy the stock, and it started to go up. But then once people realized that it was a big opportunity where no one was selling, everyone had to keep on buying. Not only the hedge funds because of the shorts, but then you had a whole bunch of big money coming in, either buying shares or options. And that's how it went from $17 at the beginning of January all the way up to $483 a share. So I think we're seeing some very exciting things happening. Now, I think the key thing for your audience to know is the name of the game is the COMEX. The COMEX is where the price is set, and at the point in which they can't get enough silver to deliver on their contracts, that's when you're going to start to see the price start to run quite aggressively. And we saw some of that happen in last July. So from mid-July to the first week of August, the price of silver went up from about $16 an ounce up to $29. In that 3-week period, there was a requirement to deliver silver, and they were struggling to find requisite silver to deliver, and that's why the price ran. And obviously we haven't seen the price go back down to $16 an ounce because we've found a new plateau. So the name of the game is to drain enough physical silver out of the system so that when the players of the COMEX have to deliver, they can't get enough, and that's when the squeeze happens and the price rises. So what I would say is, so the things I've picked up in the last 3 weeks that are promising is, the first is, Andy and yourself and others are saying there's an unprecedented amount of demand. It's stronger than 2011. It's stronger than March last year, and basically everyone's being squeezed for physical product. So that's a very positive sign. And some people have said there's a difference between the retail market and the wholesale market, which is the 1,000-ounce silver bars. Now, I think there was an interview last week, and Andy, I think, also confirmed this with Chris Marcus on Arcadia Economics, that the premiums on wholesale 1,000-ounce bars is the highest it's ever been, because it's starting to get harder to source these 1,000-ounce bars. And these 1,000-ounce bars, I mean, this is what's so critical to the SLV as well as to the COMEX. Now, when you look at the SLV, I think the corruption of the SLV has now been exposed. They changed their prospectus. Well, actually, before they changed their prospectus, so much money was flowing into SLV that they were required over a 3-day period to add 118 million ounces to the vaults. Now, I know that Chris Marcus called up SLV and said, well, explain how this happens, and he got told point blank that they have to put the silver in the vault on the day. So now a whole bunch of players in the industry, like Craig Hemke, is saying that's physically impossible to put 118 million ounces in the vault in a 3-day period. So how could that happen? Well, what did they do? They changed their perspective and saying there's now a mismatch between shares on issue and the amount of silver in the vault. So they effectively have defaulted on their obligation to their new shareholders because they don't have the requisite amount of silver. So I think that's where a whole bunch of people are now waking up to that whole situation. And just listening to Big Square this morning, talking about the prospectus, if you have 50,000 shares in SLV, you can convert that into physical. And I think Ted Butler has been writing over the last week and a half, suggesting that there are some big players trying to drain silver out of the SLV, and obviously trying to make that shortage, trying to exacerbate it. Now, as we look forward over the next fortnight, the big event in silver is this March contract. And I looked at this morning with the open interest on the COMEX. It's about 87,000 contracts, which is I think in the order of about 400 million ounces to be delivered. Now, as we get down to the delivery date, which is next week, the open interest will reduce, but it looks like that the total number of contracts that will stand for delivery will be the biggest on record. And again, as the physical market is drained, as the wholesale market is drained, as the SLV is drained, the question will be is if they physically have to deliver record amount of ounces of silver, where is it coming from? And obviously at the point at which the game is up, that's when silver will have to run so that they can entice people to sell to actually meet this contractual demand. So again, some people, some of our colleagues on the alternative media is saying that this is going to blow up within weeks as we get into the March contract. Some saying it's going to take could be 6 to 9 months. But I think the end game for silver, we have arrived. We are hearing people with deep industry experience to say that things have never happened before what we are seeing over the last few weeks. And obviously, we will just have to see how it happens. But I think it's a very exciting time for those who want, who want justice and who want economic freedom in these commodity markets. And we should start to see how things will play. Now, obviously, the establishment, Congress, the CFTC, DOJ, FBI, others, they will respond. And obviously, the SLV is regulated by the SEC, so they will respond. And obviously, their response will be to perpetuate the corruption and the manipulation of the market. But there's so much market force at the moment that potentially the market, the power of the market can overwhelm whatever counter move that the establishment wants to implement over the next 2 weeks.
It's fascinating when you look at all the factors that are at play here. One thing we haven't talked about is what the impact is on the ordinary person. And you did touch in passing, you did talk about retail demand, you talked about wholesale demand. So I think that plays out in those two areas. I know I come in contact with, on a daily and weekly basis, individuals, families who are trying to find some protection for themselves. So part of what they're doing, some of them is trying to join this cause and try to break the market free as you've described. But a big part of what they're trying to do is just take care of their business within their own four walls of their house and say, not for me and my house. For me and my house, we're not going to be part of the crazy debased fiat currency system, completely subject to that anymore. Our savings, our future of our finances, of our family is not going to be completely out of the control of our hands. You mentioned in the wholesale market as well. Just today, I was contacted by two different money managers asking if I would take referrals from them for their clients who are looking for physical acquisition of metals. And I'm thinking, wow. And then one of them said he's got an entire practice of other money managers who have been basically thinking that he's off his rocker for the past 10 to 15 years because he's been the only one marching to a different drummer. And now they're coming back, some of them, and saying to him, I guess we should have been listening to you all along. And I wonder, is it just this most recent move of silver that we just saw at the end of January and the publicity it got from Reddit and so on? Or is there something that's critical mass that's forming of people's awareness of that we can't just come up with $1.9 trillion stimulus plans every month or two and actually have that be a world in which gravity still applies? What's your thought about? And then I want to talk about how more people can be protected. Is it by these wholesale investment managers waking up and saying, wow, I'm in charge of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people's pensions and that sort of thing. I guess I better do something to protect them. So first of all, can you respond on that topic of, do you think it's just publicity that's getting people to wake up, or is there more to it than that people are getting to sense the reality of what's been going on is not sustainable, is not real, and they're starting to wake up in general. Can you respond to that one first?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I would say, well, and again, I'm not in America, so I'm in Australia. But looking from where I am, I think obviously the what happened with the Reddit group, it drove a lot of attention on not just like on the alternative media, but on social media like Twitter, and then obviously in terms of some of the other platforms, even like Facebook, there was a lot of chatter about silver. But obviously you started to see a lot of mainstream reporting about silver. CNBC, Wall Street Journal. I mean, people have been in this game for a long time, saying that there's articles about silver that have never been discussed before, and I think that attention has brought a lot of energy to the market. But the other thing I think is obviously everyone wants to make money, and I think when people saw the opportunity to make money in GameStop, and then people are waking up to this silver opportunity. Now, you and I have been awake to this opportunity for years, but I think there's a lot of people waking up to that. So I think that's important. I do think that so Biden's policies are in sharp contrast to a lot of the Trump policies, and I think that Biden has probably make a lot of people quite concerned. So, and obviously we know that the $1.9 trillion stimulus package, and then there's the $2 trillion for climate change, and then obviously they have to be financed through additional money printing. But there's a whole host of decisions that Biden has made that I've just been watching on American mainstream media, and people going, I didn't think he was going to be this radical. For example, some of the immigration changes, or he promised in the debate, we're not going to stop fracking. Well, what did he do? He stopped fracking. Stopping the construction of the XL Keystone pipeline, which has cost thousands of jobs, even though that pipeline has been under construction for years. Well, I mean, I understand that before a construction job starts, you may be against the project, but once the project has basically been midstream, it's sort of crazy to say, well, we're just going to stop it. So there's been a range of decisions that Biden has made. Now, we have talked about the election, and we won't go into a lot of detail given censorship requirements with the particular platforms. But I think the combination of the election fiasco, the fiasco of the impeachment about the raid of the 6th of January, in which the Democrats were exposed for changing evidence during the trial in the Senate, but also a number of very dangerous and concerning policy decisions that Biden has come out with in terms of some of these executive orders. I think it's really shocked a lot of Americans, because what they were told and how Biden was projected last year is very different to what they're seeing now. So I think all of that, on top of in terms of the publicity of the Reddit group and the mainstream media discussion of silver, I think that's really woken up a lot of Americans. And because, again, this is a very tiny market, it doesn't take a lot of money to be able to move this. Now, obviously, one of the important contributions that the retail market has on the wholesale market is that if retail dealerships like Miles Franklin and others are struggling to source product, well, how do the refiners make new product? They go buy the 1,000-ounce bars, they drain it from the SLV, they drain it from the COMEX, and then they melt that silver down, and they create new retail products. So I think that all of this activity is basically feeding on each other, and obviously it's kind of like with an avalanche. As the momentum builds, it just gets stronger and stronger.
How about the wholesale awakening of money managers, pension managers, retirement fund managers? Do you have any direct contacts? I mentioned two that have reached out to me, and that makes a third if you altogether so far. But it just seems to be accelerating in my experience. Do you have similar phenomenon happening from your standpoint, or specific examples you're aware of managers of large pools of funds that are starting to take a step into metals that hadn't in the past?
I'm in contact with people who do manage money, and some of the people who I've been speaking with have been advocating for gold and silver for quite a while. So I would say that phenomena among the circles I'm aware of has been happening for the last probably 18 months. So I don't think we're seeing. Look, I'm not aware of new money managers in Australia who have just woken up to silver and say, okay, we're now going to allocate a significant amount of money in terms of this market. But obviously in terms of the United States, I mean, look, like you said, I think there's evidence of not just Wall Street, banks and hedge funds piling in, but it could be now. You've got Elon Musk. He's announced 1.5 billion into Bitcoin, but a part of his announcement is he says we reserve the right to start buying some gold and silver. And I think in the last 48 hours, I've seen some discussion that he's started to buy gold. So again, you do have quite a few number of billionaires. Buffett has a big history with silver, so some of these people may be buying behind the scenes. Maybe that buying has started to accelerate, but I do think that for those who are not aware of the manipulation and that they and of the profit opportunity, I think people are waking up. And I'll just make one point. Now, I wrote an article last year on my website, and anyone can come to my website and read it for free. It's called George Soros and the Silver Moonshot. When I think about what is the silver market, so just in terms of a basic microeconomic lesson, if you think about demand and supply, when demand equals supply, you get the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity of where the market settles. What the silver market is we have a price ceiling below equilibrium. And what that means from a basic microeconomic point of view is, that basically demand is outstripping supply. Now, and obviously, how does that price ceiling happen? That price ceiling is what happens at the COMEX. But when the price ceiling breaks, well, what happens to the price? It goes towards equilibrium. And that, I think, is the exciting part. Because what is equilibrium? Some people saying it's $100 an ounce. Some people saying it's $200 an ounce. You've got Cliff High saying 600. When I've done some calculations myself in Australian dollar terms, I'm coming to about 800 Australian, and the current price is around $35 an ounce. So, there's different ways to calculate what equilibrium is, but it's many, many times more than what we are now. And when you look at what is the potential profit opportunity, well, cash is basically dead. Bonds are not yielding much return. And in some cases, if you look at the 10 and the 30-year yield, they're spiking. I was just looking at the yield today. So bond prices at the long end of the curve are falling. Real estate, you may get a few percent per year. The stock market's already at an all-time high. So where is the next big opportunity where you can make instant wealth? It's in a manipulated market that the price heads towards equilibrium, and obviously, kind of like with palladium, it went up 400% in short order, and silver has that potential to go much more than palladium because it is the most manipulated market in the world. And so the reason why I titled the article George Soros and the Silver Moonshot is because George Soros bets. So in 1992, the UK government manipulated the foreign exchange market and the value of the pound versus the German mark, or in terms of the Deutsche Mark, it was at a level that was the pound was overvalued, and George Soros knew that that peg, that price that the government set, couldn't be sustained. So he had a $1 billion position, and within the course of one morning, he increased his position from $1 billion to $10 billion, and he broke the Bank of England. And by the price collapsing 25% towards equilibrium, he made $1 billion profit in 4 weeks. And so it's a very simple economic lesson that I learned in first year economics. That I, as I was reflecting on the silver market last year, I'm thinking, I've seen this before. This is what George Soros did with the pound, when there was a price ceiling, there was a price floor above equilibrium in the foreign exchange market. Well, what do we have here in the silver market? We have a price ceiling below equilibrium, and once the ceiling breaks, we go towards equilibrium, and the sky's the limit as to what that really is.
If we could turn our attention to other writings that you've done, so it's not so much in the financial, but in the natural law, human rights, freedom, our proper relationship, with God, the government's proper relationship and duty to us, and our rights in that. You've written about the philosophy and writings of Thomas Jefferson and applied them to modern Australian society and political strife, and you've gotten some interesting reception of those writings. Can you give us a very high-level summary of what your point was that you're making, why you're making it at this time, and then what the reception was that you've been receiving?
Sure. So I think our last interview, which you put on, I think you put on Rumble as opposed to YouTube, we talked about there's an inquiry underway in Australia about extremist movements and radicalization, and the proposition is that there's an explosion of far-right extremism in Australia that's making people concerned, and including the intelligence services. So we have an organisation called ASIO that basically looks at foreign interference in Australia, that does counter-espionage work, but it also does counter-terrorism work. And so they claim that far-right extremism has exploded in the last 4 years. And when you boil that down to, well, what does that mean? They're saying young white Australians, late teens, early 20s, are now speaking on social media in a way that is anti-establishment, that is contrary to societal norms, and people are concerned that this may lead to violence. Now, some people claim that some of these groups are neo-Nazis. I haven't seen a lot of or met a lot of neo-Nazis in Australia, but I would say that now I know the situation is slightly different in America compared to Australia, but there has been no explosion of white-dominated terrorism in terms of this country. So I mean, to me, it seems like, kind of like you and me, we don't accept the mainstream narrative about a whole host of subjects. And if you don't accept what the establishment is saying, they place a label on you and say you're extreme because you engage in disinformation, you push conspiracy theories on the internet, and you're so detached from reality that you're a threat to society. And so what I decided to do was to counteract this by putting in a submission. And I think so the inquiry started in December. Submissions were due last Friday on the 12th of February, so I put in my submission. And one of the points I made was that, and I mean, maybe you can speak about American law, but under Australian law, any violence against the government, any discussion or urging against of violence against the government, that's completely illegal. And one of the big points I made was, well, 200 years ago, Thomas Jefferson, in the Declaration of Independence, basically said, well, we have natural rights that come from God. And again, this was not purely an American invention. John Adams in 1765, 11 years before the Revolution, wrote a essay called the Canon he wrote about canon and feudal law, and he basically said that that liberty or rights that come from God predate Magna Carta, predates Parliament, predates the monarchy. I mean, these are natural things like the freedom to, just like your First Amendment, the freedom to speak and the freedom to believe and the freedom to think and the freedom to assemble. These are things that are just naturally innate with human nature, and they can't be taken away from government. And so what I've tried to say is, while I agree with the general proposition that violence against the government is a threat to society and it shouldn't be tolerated, because we want to have a peaceful and stable society and a functioning government. There are times in human history where government gets out of control, becomes tyrannical, and the only way to restore those natural rights is through violence. And so Thomas Jefferson, I believe, if he was alive today in Australia, would be classified as a far-right extremist, and his writings would be subject to government surveillance. And so what I've tried to argue is that the government should make a definitive statement to say that Jefferson is not a right-wing extremist, that there is such things as natural rights. So whereas your founding document acknowledges natural rights, Australia has no founding document that says we have natural rights. So it's neither our constitution or anything from England which explicitly says, or any federal law which explicitly says we have natural rights. And there is no acknowledgement that we have the right to use violence to defend those rights. So I'm actually saying that in the most extreme of extreme circumstances, as the last resort, violence against an out-of-control government should be acknowledged. That is an option. Now, you may not be aware, Dunnigan, that in 1854 we had what we call the Eureka Stockade. So this was in Melbourne during the gold rush. We had a tyrannical government that was imprisoning people. So they applied a mining tax called a license tax. You needed a license to mine gold, and the police were super aggressive of how they were applying these laws. And there was some murder of some miners, and the court system was completely rigged. And the miners were so outraged with how they were behaving, they decided to form a group called the Ballarat Reform League. And they created effectively a stockade where there was about 30 people with guns who said that they were declaring independence from the UK, and they wanted to have their freedom. And within 20 minutes on, I think it was the 3rd of December, they were executed by the police. Now, that was a traumatic event in Australian history. But one of the things that resulted from that sacrifice was there was a number of political reforms that was made to Australian democracy. And one of the things that happened was, so Americans may not understand that. So when Americans vote on election day, you're able to go in a secret booth and you're able to vote in private, and you can vote for whichever candidate you wish. That secret ballot for democratic elections was actually an Australian invention. And it actually resulted from this Eureka Stockade that happened in 1854. So Australia's biggest gift to the world in 200 years of our existence has been the secret ballot in democratic elections, which is the gold standard for democratic elections. And it happened because people used violence against the government when the government got out of control. So I'm hoping that the government or the committee is willing to acknowledge some of these central points. And we'll obviously wait to see what happens as the committee considers my submission, and whether we actually have some public hearings, and whether I have the opportunity to go testify in front of Parliament. But the other point I will make is that where the government says there's been an explosion of extremism on social media and how people talk about the government, we have seen right across the, what they call the OECD, which is about 26, 27 countries, which is including the United States and Western Europe and Australia, New Zealand, etc. There's a collapse in trust in political and civic institutions. There's a number of statistics I cited about Australia as well as the OECD. And no one trusts the government, no one trusts the politicians, no one trusts the financial establishment, because there's been too many domestic and international scandals. Public policy outcomes are getting worse. I mean, America's in decline, Australia's in decline, and while there are some voices who are willing to acknowledge that America is going backwards, we haven't had that frank conversation in Australia. And the statistics are quite clear. As I was telling one journalist the other day, in the last 20 years, Australians are deeper in debt, we're under more financial pressure, we're fatter, we're more depressed, we're more hooked on drugs, both prescription and narcotics, and our children are doing less well in math, science, and English compared to 20 years ago. That, to me, on any objective measure, is a country in decline, and people are upset. And so what I've tried to say to people is, in terms of my submission, rather than because what I think they're going to do is they're going to increase criminal laws, they're going to increase surveillance, they're going to crack down on discussion on social media, and they're going to spend more money on so-called de-radicalization programs. And I've said these are band-aid solutions. The best way to calm everyone down and to ensure that people still have confidence in our political system is to actually start doing the people's work, start to improve people's lives, deal with the issues that people want dealt with, and hopefully we can have a peaceful and a harmonious society. And so I think these are the key points I've made, and we will see how the committee responds, because I think the committee wants to go after so-called conservatives who they don't like, and try to just paint a broad brush as all these people are extremists, where I've tried to inject a whole set of arguments they probably didn't anticipate. And hopefully we get a good outcome out of that process.
Well, I applaud you for your efforts there, because I think there's like 74 to 79 million people in the U.S. right now that are feeling disenfranchised and being labeled as extremists. They were labeled as deplorables for the past, 8 years, and now they're being labeled as extremists as well. So there's a point where people who are standing up for traditional values and natural law and natural rights have had enough of being labeled, and instead want to write this direction and be able to speak freely and so on, as you say. In fact, we're speaking with Dr. Edwin Vieira again this week. We had him on about a month ago where he said, when you have the people who are taking the highest offices in the land vowing that they're going to do a roundup and a purge, first silencing and then purging of people who disagreed with them, he said, well, there may be no recourse against that in law if the people who are in charge of enforcing the law are of that camp. He said, but then you have to go to a higher law. And in the case of the U.S., we do reach to our Declaration of Independence, which you said, you don't have the benefit of in Australia. But I think you're leveraging a lot of Thomas Jefferson and others' philosophies and that they've brought out. I hope that bears fruit. We also spoke with James Rawls, who's the editor of survivalblog.net, and his quote was the title of our interview with him was, "We're living in the age of deception and betrayal." And he talked about invest accordingly, relocate accordingly, prepare accordingly. So people are taking matters into their own hands if as you said, if the government isn't about doing the people's business, then the people need to at least get about doing their own business rather than waiting for the powers that be to do it for them. And second of all, get about the business of righting the ship that's gone wrong. We're glad to have you here. If people want to follow your work, John, where can they get plugged in?
Sure. So I have a YouTube channel that I regularly do with Martin North. It's called In the Interest of the People. That's on YouTube. So we talk a lot about economics and some of these other matters. I have my own website, like you said, adamseconomics.com. I'm on social media. People can follow me on Twitter, Telegram, in terms of LinkedIn, in terms of Facebook. But if people want to send me an email, john@adamseconomics.com, you can find me there, and happy to engage with anyone around the world.
And folks, so that you don't lose track of us, John mentioned in passing there that we're all skating on the edge of being declared extremists by just trying to talk about what's traditional. And so anyway, if you want to make sure you don't lose touch with us, go to libertyandfinance.com. Over in the left-hand margin, put your name and email address, push submit. We'll get you on our free email list that comes out 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so that you know all of our guests, all of the links and resources that they provide, and where we end up. But we've also branched out beyond YouTube into both Rumble and Brighteon. Find us there. We'll put the links to that in the description of this video. And as always, John Adams from adamseconomics.com. Thank you for joining us here on Liberty and Finance.
Thank you for having me.
If you've decided that now is the right time for you to protect your family's financial future by acquiring physical precious metals, gold and silver, I'm delighted to let you know that I have now become a licensed dealer's representative for Miles Franklin, one of the oldest and most trusted names in bullion dealerships. And we can provide you with physical delivery to your personal possession or to professional vault storage or precious metals IRAs. Just email me at libertyandfinance@protonmail.com, and please include your name and phone number in your email to libertyandfinance@protonmail.com. We'll get right back with you and find out how to best meet your needs so that you can either begin or increase your acquisition of physical precious metals now and protect your family's future starting today.